Maybe I should stop. I don't see where you stop.
JT, what's your prompt?
Which one?
The synthesis.
Oh. And an essay that synthesizes and uses force support.
Okay, so you can stop right there. So this middle part, you were doing a fine job. Ben? So this middle chunk right here, keep in mind, this is the part that you are going to be responding to. So in an essay that synthesizes at least 2 expository chapters from the Grapes of Wrath, so the non-Joe chapters, but the ones where it's like the short little mini essays, as well as 4 other selections, write an essay that argues your position to the extent, and I would say extent is a key word, to which Wilde's claims are valid. If you have the question going, well, what exactly are Wilde's claims? Remember, that's the part then that gets explained up here. And so I would certainly say Wilde claims that disobedience is a valuable human trait and that it promotes social progress. That's the part that you're going to be arguing to which extent he is correct. It is not merely just a yes, he's correct, or no, he's incorrect. The word extent is meant to give you flexibility, but also meant to give you responsibility to kind of decide to what degree is he correct. So options would be, he's right. People should always rebel, should always be disobedient, because that's an important part of social progress. You could have someone take the much more conservative approach that rules and laws are here for a reason, and so it's something that needs to be followed at all times. Therefore, you should never, ever, 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 ever be disobedient towards any kind of authority in government. My guess is that most of you are probably going to fall somewhere in the middle. There's a time when it's appropriate to be disobedient, and there's a time when it's not appropriate to be disobedient. If that's the direction that you're going in, then you have to kind of explain when is it appropriate and when is it not appropriate. And that could end up kind of being the majority of your essay, explaining when it's okay and when it's not okay. So those would be some ideas for you to kind of start going around in your head. What would be possible problem if we were disobedient all the time?
That's not.
So you could go, there would be total anarchy, taking place. If you had total anarchy, you would have a government that is not stable or sustainable, or a government that is basically non-existent. Someone wrote about that. That government is best which governs or not at all. So you could certainly argue that that is not going to be appropriate. Oh, by the way, by you making reference to that, you just used source A. You could argue that, well, no, there are times when you have to rebel. Like when? Well, I'm not even worried about like sources, but like when is it appropriate to? But why?
Laws themselves are corrupted. Because
Laws are corrupted.
Whatever force is doing it is doing it bad.
So there's malintent. You're doing it to oppress people. Now that's when people start to make reference. Now, Ange, to because what are his statement about laws? There's 2 types, there's just and unjust law. So if you're going, anytime there is an unjust law, a person needs to rebel, you've made reference now to Martin Luther King. So that's using source material there. They don't drive the argument, you drive the argument, but you are acknowledging them as a way to kind of extend your argument and improve upon it.
Couldn't you also cite the Kaepernick article because
Yeah.
was getting that because of
And if you, the area where people, I would say, are most likely to run into obstacles is you use something like King, just and unjust laws. Well, my question then is going to be, well, what is a just or an unjust law? So, yeah, whether it's using Kaepernick, whether it's using any of those other sources in there, and again, I don't care which sources you use. You could decide, I don't want to do anything with Thoreau, Wollstonecraft, and King. I'd rather, keep it to the shorter ones down here, minus Steinbeck, because you have to use him, and that's perfectly fine. But I don't want people to give up on these 3 because you go right to quizzes that I really didn't like, and I despise you for those 2 weeks, Mr. Kane, that there's still very valuable content that you can use. Anytime you use a source, you're not summarizing the source. You're not explaining everything that's happening within the source. You're blending the source's argument in with your own to provide more support for it. And we'll do some things next week to kind of show how this happens a little bit more with some past synthesis essays or sample synthesis essays. But yeah, you could use Preston with the Kaepernick article. You could do the stuff down here where we had the dress code issue, with source I that gets mentioned, or even the visual sources can certainly get used with it. But there's certainly going to have to be some explanation by what people mean, whether you're using just unjust laws or something else. But I don't want you to get afraid of these sources. Understand that with them being lengthy, it gives you a lot of flexibility to use some stuff from them. Down at the bottom, we didn't really get to talk about any of this stuff. Just want to kind of mention a few things about it, then we'll move on to the LeBron James letter. The suggested page length, this is not a requirement. The 4 to 6 pages, that just tends to be where they have gone over the past 10, 11, however many years they've been doing synthesis essays at this point. It'll be a longer essay because it's a take-home essay. It's not a TWA. You certainly have a fair amount of sources that are going to get utilized with it. And remember, not next week, the week after, the 14th, all that week, 14th through the 19th, you're going to have laptops in here where you're going to be able to work on things, kind of bring in source material and all that kind of stuff. So independent reading is still more at the forefront because your final copy for this isn't going to be till December something, but certainly good to kind of start thinking about it. Parenthetical documentation, you're going to follow the AP synthesis guidelines, which says, you use source J or Steinbeck, the description that's in parentheses. The only time you have to worry about an MLA works cited page or parenthetical documentation would be if you are using outside sources. So if the only source material you use are the stuff with the synthesis essay, you don't have to worry about a works cited page. If you find some outside articles that you want to incorporate along with it, which you certainly can, then those would have to get cited separately. If Amanda number 2 were to go, well, can I use this article in place of one of the synthesis sources? I'll go, no. You can use it, but it will be in addition to the previously stated, 5 source requirement. The stuff down here we'll kind of get into so far as putting your position first and then supporting with appropriate sources second. One thing that is going to be necessary, and we haven't made this a requirement yet for any essay assignments, but for this one it is, you have to include a rebuttal paragraph examining an opposing point of view. So rebuttal basically is going to be you stating what opponents would argue and then explaining why they are wrong. Rebuttal paragraphs are a nice habit to get in, or a nice thing to get in the habit of using when it comes to argument essays like a DRQ, like a synthesis. It gives you more material to write about without having to really come up with additional subtopics. You could go, those are arguments you have to rebut all the time. Don't realize that total anarchy would ensue, and then you can explain the shortfalls of that argument. Rebuttals are nice places where you can incorporate sources that you don't agree with. So you can use a source within a synthesis essay that you don't agree with, and you can explain why you think Thoreau's argument is short-sighted, or maybe where some other person, misses a mark with his or her argument. So just because you're using the source doesn't mean you and that author, that writer, have to be on the same page at all times. Again, reaffirming 5 sources, 2 of which will be chapters from Steinbeck, counting Steinbeck as 1 source, and then 4 additional sources. And then last Thursday was when we went over this optic stuff with the overview parts, title, inferences, and conclusion. Did a nice job with those visual sources that we took a look at. You have 2 visual sources within your packet, the Olympic photo and then that political cartoon, which you can certainly use. And again, I'll say it over and over, but I mean it. I don't care which sources you use. So whichever ones you feel will best help your argument be shaped. People run into trouble when they merely summarize what the source is stating. Then they're basically giving Thoreau's opinion, Steinbeck's opinion, King's opinion, Wollstonecraft without the issue.
Do we have to use direct like quote things?
Like if you use a source, put it in quotes? No. You can quote. There's usually 3 things you can do. You can quote. You can paraphrase. So you're still making reference to a specific point, which you're putting it in your own words, or you can summarize, and this is the wording that gets used in the prompt. Of those three, summary is usually the worst, because you're not advancing anything. But you could go Thoreau writes, that government is best which governs least, do a direct quotation. Or you could do something like, King mentions that, most governments have two types of laws, just or unjust. And you're not quoting them word for word. Whichever way you go, you're still going to put that citation in the parentheses next to it to kind of indicate that you're using the source.
So you don't have to put like specific pages either.
I'll say this again when we get to it. Steinbeck's the only one where I want you to do that. Just because there's so many different places that we're pulling from. But you don't have to go Thoreau 7, Wollstonecraft 18, or anything like that.
And then you said we have to draw in two like chapters, right? Yeah, two distinct
Mhm.
chapters. But we just say like chapter 7 is happening.
You would just be able to go like Steinbeck writes. Like you don't even have to mention, in the turtle chapter he states, or in the car salesman chapter, you just go, Thoreau. Steinbeck, communicates, writes, argues, whatever, and that would be fine. And that would be the only one where you do the page numbers. There's not a rule as to quoting, paraphrasing. I bet most people will be pretty close to 50-50. Half of them they'll quote, half of them they'll paraphrase. I'm a big proponent, and I just call it blending, where you take key phrases from theirs in quotation marks, but you embed that into your own sentence. And so for me, that's you kind of taking ownership of the ideas a little bit more, and I think that benefits you. Certainly if you do the visual sources, you're probably not going to be quoting much of anything, because you're explaining more what's going on visually as opposed to actual text words, things like that. The last thing then, down before we move on to LeBron James' letter, down at the very bottom, it does mention that you have a rough draft is going to be due in advance. That date is going to be Monday, November the 21st. That is the Monday before Thanksgiving break. So that's 3 weeks from today. Now remember, from the 14th through the 19th, you're going to have laptops in class. So that's when I would expect most of this is going to be taken care of. I want you to get a rough draft done before break, so that over Thanksgiving, if you need to finish up anything with independent reading, you can focus on that. But this means Cody will have a rough draft going into Thanksgiving. He can then shift focus to independent reading if need be. Then when he needs to finish up his synthesis come December, he already has a working rough draft that hopefully it's just kind of finishing off some fine tuning. The due date for this I have not formally decided on yet. I'll give it to you next week. You are turning in your your independent reading essay on November the 29th. It will be at least a week after that before you submit it. My guess, I'm kind of leaning towards that Friday, which I think is December 9th, maybe. But it's going to be silly for someone to give me an essay on December the 5th, and I'm not done reading the independent reading essays yet. You're not benefiting, I'm not benefiting by it. So I would say it'll probably be towards the end of that first full week of December when the whole kit and caboodle will get turned in.
Do people need to check yours and fill out that paper? Help two people revise your essays?
The peer edit?
Yeah.
No, we won't do anything that formal for it this time around. But it'll be similar where on Monday the 29th you'll have a paper copy in class. We'll check it in for homework grade. And we'll still do some peer reviewing, but it won't be quite as structured as what we did at the beginning.
Yeah, I can tell that.
Alright. Any other questions, synthesis-wise? Okay. We'll take a look at LeBron James' letter to Cleveland, which I don't think Noah's wore a LeBron James jersey yet.
It says he loves it.
You go with your 76ers jersey, but
I like that jersey. I do have a LeBron James jersey that fits me, but I have like 3 from the Heat, so it's really not worth wearing. Because I don't like the Cleveland jerseys are.
It's a bandwagon.
I don't like the blue and gold.
It's a lot of
I'll show you the pictures.
if you go nostalgia, you can get like the old blue and white jerseys and stuff. LeBron James.
white collar.
whether you're familiar with the context of the letter or not, and it doesn't really matter if you are, majority of folks have probably heard of LeBron James before, basketball player, currently plays for Cleveland Cavaliers, not too far away from here. Current reigning NBA champions.
Yeah.
LeBron James started his career in Cleveland, drafted out of high school, went to high school in Northeast Ohio, Akron area. I forget the exact year they would have been drafted, probably 2003. So he'd been drafted as an 18-year-old and plays for Cleveland Cavaliers, who are a terrible franchise when he gets drafted. Plays with them for 6-7 years. They go to NBA championship. They don't win, but successful team. And then he decides to go to Miami as a free agent, which upsets people in a couple ways. Number one, he's from Cleveland, or at least from Northeast Ohio, so, born, bred, athlete, playing for the hometown team, and then decides to leave. The manner in which he did it, I would say, upset more people than the fact that he left. It was aired on ESPN, I think it was like 2-hour-long television special called The Decision, where it's basically a love fest of LeBron James for the first hour and 45 minutes or hour and 55 minutes. And the last 5 minutes is him going, I've decided that I'm going to play in Miami. So it's this huge production where normally, there's a small little press conference or news release that takes place that so-and-so has signed with another team. But he goes on air, TV, live broadcast. Mention anarchy. Anarchy erupts in Cleveland. People are at the bars and the restaurants watching this at friends' houses. They're throwing all their LeBron jersey memorabilia away. Jerseys are being lit on fire in the streets and thrown out. Taking their LeBron jersey posters and ripping them in half and all this kind of stuff. The owner of the Cavaliers, Dan Gilbert, writes a scathing email that gets published in the newspaper, which basically tears LeBron James apart. But he doesn't care because he's going to Miami. That's pretty. That's a.
He was getting paid a lot.
Actually, if the way the NBA works, the team that you're originally with can pay you more money. That a max contract, if you stayed in Cleveland, would have been worth more money than a max contract in Miami by a couple $1 million, which for us is significant when you're making 24 or 25 million. Not quite as significant. But he could have made more money in Cleveland. But he goes to Miami for 4 years. They win 2 championships, play in the finals every year. And then in July of 2014, this letter gets published on SI.com, SportsIllustrated.com, where he states, as you can see at the top, I'm coming back to Cleveland. So I want you to read the letter, front, and then it goes on the back for a little bit. And in a soapstone kind of frame of mind, identify what his purpose is. Now, someone will raise their hand and go, his purpose is to say that he's coming back to Cleveland, at which point I will give you dirty looks and forever diminish your reputation within this class. Because, we know that, but specifically, what would be like the purpose of his? So you can start thinking of it like in that one-word soapstone kind of frame of mind verb. What is his purpose with the letter itself? So take a few minutes, read the letter, identify the purpose, and then we're going to talk about it.
This was other ones the FBI called them. And they were apparently they came to the school or something. And it's because some student referenced him and he was never informed. So apparently the FBI showed up at the school one time looking for him. They thought he was in trouble.
That happened to our neighbor where they were looking around, asking cryptic questions, but he had no idea what they were for, but it was for employment. I had a chance to read the letter. So what are some purposes? And again, there's multiple ones, so it's not going to be simply just one. But in the whole idea of that, like, one word kind of vein, what would be some purposes that we could have? Apologize. To Cleveland, basically, for leaving the first time, Amanda? Okay. Explanation? Still of, like, why I left.
Well, it says I'm doing this essay because I want an opportunity to explain myself uninterrupted. I don't want anyone thinking he didn't get along with the head coach, he didn't get along with the GM, essentially.
Okay, so
Explaining why he's going back.
and I mean, and really, it can be explained why going back, explaining why I left in the first place, explaining what some false reasons would be, and trying to put those claims to rest, so that people don't have to worry about it.
He's trying to like ease tensions all over, not just Cleveland, like of what he's trying to do with his life.
So this could be whether you're a fan of Cleveland or Miami.
Yeah.
In some ways, okay. Ease tensions. Angelina, do you have one?
I was gonna say, appreciate. It shows appreciation for
Appreciation for Ohio. Okay. And also Miami. You know, mentions things with past. Amanda. Okay. Anywhere we can do that in one word? I think you're right. Make amends. 2 words, but I like that one. Like reconnect, possibly. Alexis. Reclaim. Okay. Anything else we haven't touched upon?
Sympathize, I guess.
With the people left behind, or Miami?
The people.
Okay.
You felt like he abandoned
Okay.
them in a way.
I don't know how short they were. Sort of seems like he wants to raise his family.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
What's that?
It sort of seems like he wants to raise his family like a week or.
Yeah, he certainly mentions that directly, that this is a place where I was from, and I want to be able to bring those people, bring my family there. I'm not worried about literary devices, but what now would be some ways in which you know he does that? Like, what are some examples that he uses? Let me just go over there. That's all. That'll be fine. Like, where in the text does he do these things? Like, how do you know he's trying to sympathize?
Left my notes in the library.
Okay, you can write it. Next one.
When he says, I left Cleveland, I was on a mission, I was seeking championships, and he says that, like, Miami already knows what, winning a championship feels like, and that, like, he wants to come back to Cleveland because they've had a long drought of dominating.
Okay. So this part here, Miami already knew that feeling. Miami previously had won a championship. It was like 2003 or 2004. Dwayne Wade was on that team. But it had been prior to their last championship, I think since the 1960s, that Cleveland had last won any kind of major sports title. They won an NFL championship, but that was before there was actually a Super Bowl. So it has certainly been a while at that point. So what of those purposes, like which one would you say this does? Like what is he doing in here? Why include this purpose-wise?
I guess kind of getting the reader to, understand his choice.
Okay. So the part of that whole explanation part. All right. What else? Other things that just jump out.
The paragraph above it has the explanation too.
Doing this essay. Wanted to be uninterrupted. I think Noah, you were referencing that part before, and then also, these claims saying that he didn't get along with coach, team president, general manager, and all those things. No, not true. These are rumors. Trying to dispel them before that starts to take any shape.
The one below, the one I left Cleveland, he talks about how he wants to raise his daughter there, and how his 2 sons should grow up the way that he grew up in Cleveland.
All right, there, and what people start to recognize, and I'm not trying to get you into that AP literary term thing, but there's a lot of pathos, there's a lot of emotional appeal. I have 2 boys, and my wife Savannah's pregnant with a girl. I want to raise them in my hometown. Earlier, what does he say about hometown and him so far as family aspect? It's metaphorical.
Miami's a second.
Well, he mentions that, but in his very first, before anyone ever cared where I would play basketball, I was a kid from Northeast Ohio. It's where I walked, it's where I ran, it's where I cried, it's where I bled. Anaphora. It holds a special place in my heart. People there have seen me grow up. I sometimes feel like I'm their son. So there's certainly a family aspect there taking place, that I am a son of Northeast Ohio, not just a specific, parent. And then also on the back, after mentions about his own children, makes reference then I needed the support of my mom, my wife, which can be very tough, dealing with all that kind of stuff that was happening before.
Another part of the explanation would be the third paragraph, when he said, I went to Miami because of D-Wade, Chris Bosh, and then he said how everybody on the team made sacrifices to keep John's Haslam.
Okay. And certainly with Dwayne Wade, they have previous prior friendship, so it's a reunion in some way. But then, also mentioning Chris Bosh, Udonis Haslam, helping him win NBA titles and things like that. What does he also do so far with that trip to Miami? I shouldn't say trip, but that 4-year stint in Miami that tries to make it more relatable, probably to common fan, since he went to Miami for those 4 years.
He went there, it's like a learning experience.
Okay.
College.
Where he's going to grow up and he is going to mature, and that's what we did. We are brothers for life. I want to thank them for giving me an amazing 4 years, and then goes into, what paragraph did that come in? Down.
Are you looking for like
Yeah,
the
next
without the
second.
experience
For
of
the
how
second.
they're
Yeah, I can't find it anymore. Where's he mention the college part?
it's the second paragraph in
First page. I thought it was first page.
at the very bottom.
There you go. Yeah, these 4 years helped raise me into who I am. Thank you. Became a better player, better man, second home. Basically, this becomes his collegiate time because keep in mind, he gets drafted out of high school, and those 4 years of college is really where Dylan decides academically, professionally what he wants to do. But also, you are going to get those years to try to figure out who are you. People talk about college being like a self-discovery kind of idea. Well, you figure out responsibility, you figure out what is your kind of hierarchy of decision making, which is going to be more important, responsibility, academics, friends, fun, Thursday night football games on ESPN down on Heinz Field, or getting ready for that anatomy test I'm going to have in the pit lab, the following Friday. So certainly that idea with him doing with college, being his college experience, it's certainly a way in which he can relate to people or trying to get them certainly to relate back to him.
He goes even more into like the emotional family side right after when he says he went to Miami because of Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh.
Mm-hmm.
When he said like he became a big brother to Mario Chalmers and that like they could do anything when they all came together and worked together.
And the hardest thing is to leave what I've built with those guys. So certainly while you're coming back to a family, there is a certain family and a second home that's being left behind with them. All you're doing for this, and in order to figure all of this stuff out, I don't mean to say all you had to do and it is so simple and easy, but in some ways it's basic. You read the passage, and then you thought about it, and you figured out purpose, and then you're able to go back and find support for the purposes that you're coming up with. And when it comes to answering multiple choice questions, Mr. Kane, what's the biggest key to me answering them successfully? It's reading the passage. It's figuring out what is the point behind the passage, how are they going about setting up their argument. Then you're able to take care of the multiple choice questions. Now granted, what's going to be a complaint or an argument about Mr. Kane? This letter, compared to AP exam passages, this letter is, some people are going to go, it's easier, it's in today's terms, because a lot of the stuff that I've given you so far tend to be a little bit older, a little bit more archaic. The ones I'm going to continue to give you this week are going to be a little bit older, a little bit more archaic. But the process is exactly the same thing. You read it, you do have to kind of analyze it in your mind, what is the purpose, and how does the writer go about establishing this purpose and supporting it? If you can figure those things out, answering the multiple choice questions becomes much easier. People will sometimes skim the passage because I think there's the concern, I don't have enough time to read all this and answer the questions. If you know what you've read, answering the questions becomes much easier. People will go, but I have to keep going back to the passage every single question. You have to go back to the passage for every single question when you don't know what you read, because you're still looking for it. But if you read it and you understand it, you internalize it, answering those questions makes it much easier. And that's going to be something that we're going to kind of work with tomorrow through Thursday, so you do get in the habit of how do you want to approach the passages so that you can read them, understand them, internalize them, and then do very well with the multiple choice questions. It's still a process. It's not going to be, overnight, all of a sudden it'll make sense, but the key to doing well in the multiple choice is reading and understanding. If you can read and understand, you can answer the multiple choice questions. Certainly, literary term quizzes, being more familiar with some of the devices like the anaphora and whatnot that's getting used within the passage, those things will help. But its most basic element is reading and understanding. So tomorrow there'll be another passage. We'll deal with it. We'll talk about it, do a couple things. But Wednesday's literary term quiz is the next thing that you need to worry about grade-wise.